Well, the Prime Minister and his Akubra were up in Queensland today to promise to spend another $70 million on their big hydrogen dream. This is the miracle green fuel making power from water. And this time they're going to invest this in a planned plant. But the government's green projects and emissions targets are actually going to cost many billions more than this still. And where's all that money going to come from? Well, the government's worried about that. And here's the danger. Treasurer Jim Chalmers wrote a long essay in the Monthly a year ago saying he'd redesign capitalism. Very humble boy, this. And work out ways to steer private investors into putting their money into green schemes. And yesterday he appointed Greg Combet to head the Future Fund, which manages more than $200 billion of investments to pay particularly for the superannuation of public servants. That is a tempting pot of money for a big spending government that has wanted super funds in particular to invest in its climate schemes. And, Greg Combet is a former Labor climate change minister and chairman of the government's Net Zero Economy Agency. Joining me is the inaugural chairman of that Future Fund's Board of Guardians, David Murray. He today published an essay on the fund for the Centre of Independent Studies. David Murray also happens to be one of our most successful bankers, hugely successful as head of the Commonwealth Bank. David Murray, thank you so much for joining me. Greg Combet's appointment to the Future Fund, should we worry?
Yeah, I have some concern with it. Greg Combet is a very capable and experienced person who, in normal sense, would be able to undertake that role. But he has made comments over many years, actually, that funds in superannuation, for example, should be directed to so-called national interest projects or nation-building projects. Once you do that in a fund, you distort the asset allocation, you distort the risk-return framework, and upset the probability of returns. So I don't think it's appropriate. And the most important single asset that the Future Fund has is its independence from government, of course accompanied by a strict accountability framework.
Now, Greg Combet would argue he is independent and make a decision independently, but I worry about his mindset. For instance, the problem with these green schemes is their profitability long-term often depends on a government consensus that, yes, global warming is terrible, yes, we've got to do something about it, yeah, let's prop up all these green industries, let's punish ones that are fossil fuels. But once that consensus breaks down, of course, the assets don't have the same value, don't give the same return. What I'm suggesting here is the governments won't be able to pull back from green investments because they've got all these super funds stuck in it and they can't make Australians poorer.
Well, I think in that situation, the members of the super funds will just suffer. Whilst the private sector is not perfect, the fiscal responsibility of people in the private sector requires them to undertake very stringent analysis of anything they invest in. And the Future Fund uses managers all over the world who are very good at doing that. So once you decide something on other grounds, it's likely that the returns will not be there. And we've got plenty of examples of it. We've got Snowy 2.0, we've got the resurrection of this fast rail project from Melbourne to Brisbane. That simply doesn't work. And the energy projects themselves are going to leave us with stranded assets, too much power grid, and not enough generation of power. So, and a more costly energy system. So, the private sector doesn't do this, and that's why if we have public influence on investments, which by and large the Future Fund has steered clear of, then the returns won't be there.
Can I just finally turn to today's economic data? Retail sales fell off a cliff in December when Christmas sales are normally strong, down 2.7%. That's after, of course, I've got to say, the bump in November from the Black Friday sales. What does that tell you? What sort of position are we in?
Well, it tells me that we're reaching the point where monetary tightening is taking effect. Don't forget that the monetary tightening started from too low a point. Rates should never have been that low in the first place. But the pace of tightening to catch up had to be very, very fast. And so one can expect that with the usual lag, we're going to have a serious impact on spending, and this is a sign that that's starting to happen. But there are still structural issues affecting inflation. Particularly the cost of energy. And this means that we could be in a position where households are stretched, but the Reserve Bank doesn't have all of the clear air it needs to drop rates more quickly. So we really now must get into a process of fundamental economic reform. Total government outlays to GDP are far too high, probably 10 percentage points higher than they should be. We're going backwards on GDP per capita. That means our wealth is falling, and we're going backwards also on our exchange rate. I don't know any country in the world that has increased its prosperity by devaluing itself. So the signs for us on productivity are bad, and it can only be fixed with fundamental economic reform and a serious pulling back of government outlays.
David Murray, I didn't know you'd become such a dreamer after stepping down from your roles. This government going to cut spending, going to do economic reform instead of going, in fact, the other way, as it has for the last year and a half. I don't see that happening. So unfortunately, on that grim bit of news, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Good evening.